Atmospheric, tense music swells over dim, smoke-filled lighting in a private VIP lounge. A high-stakes card game is underway involving the burly and intimidating Russian mobster Vrade. The atmosphere is heavy with veiled threats and dangerous underworld politics. Standing at the head of the room in a tailored suit is Hamber, a mature mob patriarch with sharp features and gray-streaked hair, exuding cold authority. He leans across the table, fixes the room with a commanding stare, and delivers his absolute code. My family is the most important thing in this world to me, and I will protect them at all costs. If you step on my toe, I will cut out your heart. Hamber is a powerful, old-school syndicate boss who lives by a strict code of honor. But his world shatters when his stylish adult son, Michell, falls deeply for Trisha, a gorgeous woman concealing a deadly secret. Unbeknownst to Michell, Trisha is married to Vrade and is being weaponized as bait in a ruthless conspiracy. When Vrade brutally assaults Trisha inside a crowded nightclub, Michell reacts impulsively and shoots the mobster, instantly igniting a bloody gang war. But behind the curtain, cold calculating insider Hugh Denson and street-smart enforcer Brid are pulling the strings, using the scandal to wipe out rival leaders and seize control of the city. The stakes turn catastrophic when Trisha is executed and Hamber's daughter, Trisha, is abducted. To save his daughter's life, Hamber must face a ghost from his past, Mush, a dead former brother-in-arms seeking revenge for a 30-year-old betrayal. Forced into the bloodiest war of his career, Hamber will stop at nothing to tear down the traitors, rescue Trisha, and rewrite the laws of the underworld. The bass echoed through the subterranean floor of Club Velvet, heavy enough to rattle the ice in Michelle's glass. Dressed in a sharp, tailored suit that reflected his position as the heir to a formidable syndicate, Michell moved through the VIP section with effortless charm. He had spent his entire life sheltered by his father Hamber's ironclad rule, living off the luxury of the family empire while remaining distant from its bloody underbelly. That evening, the crowded club faded into white noise the moment he saw her. Trisha sat alone at a corner booth, bathed in the crimson wash of the neon lights. Her dark, flowing hair fell over her shoulders, framing a face of stunning beauty that carried an immediate, haunting vulnerability. Unlike the opportunistic socialites who usually populated the lounge, her eyes held a quiet, distant sadness that instantly drew Michell in. Approaching her table, Michell offered a smooth, disarming smile. He sat beside her, ordering a round of top-shelf liquor, completely unaware that every glance, every laugh, and every gentle touch was being watched from the shadows. Trisha matched his conversation with effortless glamour, leaning close as if captivated by his presence. Yet beneath her soft smiles, her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew exactly who Michell was, the beloved son of Hamber. What Michell didn't know was that Trisha was trapped in a vicious cage, married to Vrade, a burly and ruthless Russian mobster whose violent reputation terrified the entire city. Trisha hadn't chosen to be in this club, nor had she chosen to talk to Michell. She was the central piece in a hidden trap engineered to provoke the young mob heir. Across the upper mezzanine, shadowy figures monitored the encounter, waiting for the exact moment the trap would spring. Michell poured another drink, completely blind to the fact that his blossoming attraction to a mysterious, vulnerable woman was about to drag his father's empire into an explosive, blood-soaked war. The pulse of the music shifted, heavy bass vibrating through the floorboards of Club Velvet as the atmosphere turned razor-thin. Michell leaned in close to Trisha, completely enthralled by her quiet charm, entirely blind to the looming shadow until it fell directly over their table. Vrade stepped out from the crimson haze, a burly, menacing wall of a man whose presence instantly silenced the surrounding lounge. His face was twisted in a cruel, possessive grimace. Without a single word of warning, Vrade lunged forward, his thick fingers locking around Tasha's forearm. He dragged her violently out of the booth, sending glasses shattering onto the marble floor. Tasha gasped, her eyes wide with genuine terror as Vrade slapped her across the face, the crack echoing sharply over the music. She stumbled against the leather seating, cowering as the ruthless brute raised a heavy fist to strike her again. Something snapped inside Michell. Raised under Hamber's strict code of honor, watching a defenseless woman brutalized before his eyes ignited a blinding flash of fury. "Get your hands off her," Michell roared, stepping between Vrade and the trembling woman. Vrade sneered, looking down at the well-groomed young man in his tailored suit with pure disdain. He reached into his coat to draw a heavy sidearm, sneering at Michelle's interference. But Michelle's instincts, honed by years of mob upbringing, were faster. In one fluid, mechanical motion, Michell drew his custom handgun from beneath his jacket. The world seemed to slow to a crawl. Before Vrade could clear his holster, Michell pulled the trigger. A single bullet tore through the smoky air, striking Vrade square in the chest. The deafening gunshot shattered the club's illusion of luxury. Vrade's eyes widened in shock as he staggered backward, collapsing heavily against a glass table before crashing to the floor, dead. Screams erupted across the floor as patrons scrambled frantically for the exits. Tasha stood frozen, staring in horror at the pool of blood spreading across the floorboards. Michell stood over the body, his gun still smoking, his breath heavy. The line had been crossed. With a single bullet, the trap had sprung, igniting an explosive syndicate feud that would force Hamber out of the shadows to protect his family. The news of Vrade's execution rippled through the city's criminal underworld like a localized earthquake. By midnight, the high-stakes silence of Hamber's private estate was shattered by urgent phone calls from panicked syndicate bosses demanding retribution for the dead Russian mobster. Sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, dressed in a sharp tailored suit, Hamber listened silently to the threats with an unyielding, icy composure. His son, Michell, stood before him, head bowed, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline of the nightclub shooting. Hamber dismissed his son with a stern command to remain inside the estate's gated perimeter. The moment the double doors closed, Shrund, Hamber's sturdy and disciplined right-hand man, stepped forward from the shadows. He laid a heavy, encrypted tablet on the desk, displaying surveillance footage recovered from the club's security feeds. As Hamber watched the playback, his sharp features hardened. The footage made the truth glaringly clear. Vrade hadn't arrived at the club by chance, nor was Tasha's presence an accident. Seconds before Michell had entered the VIP lounge, encrypted signals had been sent directly from inside their own syndicate structure, alerting Vrade to Tasha's location and steering him straight into Michelle's path. Tasha had been planted, Vrade had been baited, and Michell had been manipulated into pulling the trigger. Hamber stood up, buttoning his jacket as a dark realization took root. This was never a foolish bar fight over a beautiful woman. It was an intricately crafted execution trap designed to force his family into an explosive gang war. An internal snake was feeding intel to external rivals, using his son's protective instincts as the fuse to blow the city apart. "They used my boy," Hamber murmured, his voice dropping into a deadly low pitch that chilled the room. His eyes burned with terrifying resolve. The shadows of betrayal were rising within his own ranks, but those who engineered the conspiracy had forgotten one fundamental truth. Hamber would tear the entire city down to its foundations before he let anyone touch his blood. Deep within the cavernous, damp basement of an abandoned industrial warehouse on the docks, the true architects of the crisis met in total secrecy. Shadows stretched across the concrete walls as Hudinson, the cold and calculating older mobster, adjusted his formal attire with meticulous precision. Standing opposite him was Brid, a tough, rugged enforcer whose street-smart appearance and scarred knuckles signaled a man who thrived on raw, unfiltered violence. Between them lay a table covered in heavily encrypted blueprints, syndicate financial routes, and high-profile hit lists detailing the city's oldest crime families. "The Russian mob is blind with rage over Vrade's death, just as we planned," Hudinson said, his sharp, weathered features twisting into a sinister, satisfied smile. His voice was quiet, icy, and entirely devoid of remorse. "Hamber thinks he's investigating a minor breach, but he's already walking directly into the storm. While his attention is focused on protecting his precious son, we strike. Brid leaned against the table with an intimidating posture, a brutal smirk crossing his face. He had spent years operating as a shadow freelancer in the city's underbelly, waiting for the exact moment to shatter the old guard's tight grip on the territories. My men are positioned near the top boss's strongholds, Brid grunted, his tone laced with dark anticipation. The moment Hamber makes his move against the Russians, we execute every syndicate leader standing in our way. It'll look like a retaliatory bloodbath. Hudinson nodded slowly, his calculating gaze fixed on a photograph of Hamber. For decades, Hamber's strict honor code had limited their profits and kept the underworld bound by outdated rules. By using Michell's impulsive rescue of Tasha as the ultimate trigger, Hudinson and Brid had engineered a perfect, self-consuming war. They would systematically eliminate rival bosses one by one, burn Hamber's empire to the ground, and build a new, absolute dictatorship over the city's criminal empire from the ashes. The puppet masters had set their grand trap into motion, and the entire city was about to bleed. Rain poured over the deserted neon-lit alleyway behind the safe house as Michell stepped out into the damp air, his jaw set in tight frustration. A shadow emerged from the downpour. Tasha. Her dark, flowing hair was drenched, clinging to her face, her glamorous look stripped away to reveal raw, sheer desperation. She lunged forward, her trembling hands grasping Michelle's jacket as tears welled in her expressive eyes. "Michelle, you have to listen to me," she sobbed, her voice barely carrying over the storm. "I never wanted any of this. They forced me to go to that club. They used me to get to your father." Michelle's heart burned with conflicted emotion. He wanted desperately to believe the vulnerable woman he had risked everything to protect. He reached out to cup her wet cheek, his voice soft. "Who forced you, Tasha? Tell me who." Before the name could leave her lips, red laser sights pierced through the rain, pinpointing their chests. "Get down," Michelle screamed, shoving Tasha behind a heavy metal dumpster just as deafening automatic gunfire shattered the night. Bullets tore through the brick walls and shattered glass, sparks exploding into the darkness. Brid's mercenary enforcers stepped out from the shadows, executing a cold, ruthless ambush designed to wipe out all witnesses. Michell drew his weapon, firing wildly into the rain to suppress the shooters. Muzzle flashes illuminated the grim carnage as Hamber's loyal guards scrambled to return fire, only to be cut down one by one. Blood stained the wet asphalt, mixing with the falling rain as bodies hit the ground. In a frantic bid to cover Tasha, Michelle reached back for her hand, but a stray heavy-caliber round ripped through the downpour. Tasha gasped, her eyes widening as the bullet struck her directly in the chest. She collapsed against the wet concrete, the life draining from her face in seconds. "Tasha!" Michelle cried out, collapsing beside her body as the violent assault intensified. The ambush had turned fatal. Caught in the middle of a brutal, blood-soaked crossfire, Michelle realized too late that the trap wasn't just closing. It was destroying everything and everyone he cared about. The echoes of the alleyway shootout hadn't even fully faded before another nightmare struck the heart of Hamber's family. Driven by frantic panic after learning of the ambush, Trisha, Hamber's strikingly attractive daughter with long dark hair and expressive eyes, had snuck out of the family estate to track her brother's cell phone signal. She refused to sit passively in luxury while her brother's life hung in the balance, unaware that she was walking directly into a secondary trap engineered by the conspirators. Her car was cornered at an isolated industrial dock known as Point Mino. Before her bodyguards could draw their weapons, dark unmarked vans boxed her vehicle in, and armed men blew out the tires. Trisha fought fiercely, her expressive eyes flashing with defiance as she struck at her attackers, but the overwhelming force dragged her out into the cold night air. Brid's ruthlessly trained mercenaries forced her into the back of a black SUV, speeding away into the shadows. Back at the estate mansion, the air turned deadly still when Hamber's tablet vibrated with an incoming video feed. Hamber stood behind his massive desk alongside his loyal right hand, Shrund. On the high-definition screen, Trisha appeared bound to a metal chair in a dimly lit warehouse, her dark hair disheveled, but her posture unyielding. A masked figure held a weapon to her temple, while a distorted voice issued a single ultimatum: surrender the syndicate's core territories, or watch the girl die. A terrifying, icy calm settled over Hamber's handsome, weathered features. His gray-streaked hair glinted under the chandelier lights as his commanding presence transformed into pure, lethal rage. The war was no longer about territory, money, or underworld politics. It had become a fight for pure personal survival. His son had been targeted, his family's honor dragged through the mud, and now his daughter had been stolen. Buttoning his sharp, tailored suit jacket, Hamber turned to Shrund with a gaze cold enough to freeze blood. The old-school syndicate boss was done playing by corporate rules. He was going to burn the city to ashes until his daughter was safely back in his arms. The steel doors of the abandoned dockside warehouse caved inward under the force of a heavy breaching vehicle, shattering the quiet gloom of Point Mino. Hamber stepped through the settling dust, his tailored suit immaculate, his sharp features locked in a mask of absolute lethal focus. Flanked by Shrund and a squad of heavily armed loyalists, he swept through the cavernous space, stepping over disarmed mercenaries until he reached the central staging floor. Bound to a metal chair beneath a single overhead light sat Trisha, her dark hair tangled, but her expressive eyes burning with defiant relief as she saw her father. But before Hamber could step forward to free her, a low, rasping voice echoed from the elevated catwalk above. "You haven't changed a bit, Hamber. Still acting like the invulnerable king of the city." Heavy footsteps creaked against the iron stairs as an older, hardened figure descended into the light. Deep facial scars mapped his rugged jawline, and his dark eyes burned with a haunting, intense gaze forged by 30 years of underground survival. Hamber froze, his breath catching in his chest as 3 decades of buried memories rushed back in a devastating wave. It was Mush. "You're dead," Hamber whispered, his commanding voice shaking with a rare, visceral shock. "I buried you 30 years ago. You left me to rot in the mud after taking everything from me." Mush spat, stepping closer, his hand resting near a heavy sidearm. The scars across his face twitched with decades of unyielding hatred. "You took the Empire, you took the life we were supposed to build, and you thought a bullet in my back would end it. I survived, Hamber. I crawled out of the dark just to make sure you felt the exact moment your world fell apart." Hamber stared at his former brother-in-arms, realizing with a sickening dread that this entire war was never just a greedy syndicate power grab. Brid and Hudinson were merely instruments. The true mastermind pulling the strings, targeting his son, and stealing his daughter was a ghost from his past seeking blood for an ancient debt. The air in the warehouse turned deadly still as 30 years of silence shattered between the two old rivals. Trisha strained against her restraints, her expressive eyes wide as the tension reached an agonizing peak. Above them on the catwalk, Hudinson stepped out from the shadows alongside Brid, a cold, calculating sneer on his weathered face as he prepared to order his mercenaries to open fire. "End this now, Mush," Hudinson shouted down. "Kill him and take the city." "You talk too much, traitor," Shrund growled, drawing his weapon in a flash and opening fire upward. Chaos erupted in an instant. The warehouse echoed with deafening gunshots as muzzle flashes illuminated the gloom. Shrund and Hamber's loyalists engaged the remaining mercenaries in a ferocious firefight. Brid lunged forward to flank Hamber, but Shrund cut him down with a precise burst, sending the rugged enforcer crashing over the railing to the concrete below. Hudinson panicked, attempting to retreat into the dark, but Hamber raised his custom sidearm and fired twice, striking the traitorous mobster square in the chest and ending his power grab forever. Through the smoke and falling brass, only Hamber and Mush remained standing, their weapons raised, pointing directly at each other's hearts. "Do it!" Hamber, Mush spat, his scarred jaw tight, his eyes burning with haunting intensity. "Finish what you started 30 years ago." Hamber stood firm, his tailored suit stained with dust, his handsome features solemn. "I'm not fighting for an ancient grudge, Mush. I'm fighting for my daughter. I made mistakes back then, but I won't let you murder my future for your past. Mush's finger twitched on the trigger, a fleeting shadow of hesitation crossing his rugged face as he looked from Hamber to Trisha's terrified, tear-streaked eyes. That split second was all Hamber needed. With a swift, mechanical motion, Hamber fired a single, non-lethal shot, disarming Mush and knocking him off his feet. Sweeping forward before the fallen man could recover, Hamber unholstered his knife, cut Trisha's bindings, and pulled her tightly into his arms. "I've got you, baby," he whispered softly. With the traitors dead and the ghost of his past finally silenced, Hamber shielded his daughter and led her out into the cold night air. The heavy oak doors of the grand boardroom swung shut, sealing out the noise of the city. Rounding the polished table sat the remaining syndicate bosses, their hardened faces illuminated by the dim chandelier light. The air was thick with tension, every man in the room acutely aware of the violent purge that had wiped out Hudinson, Brid, and the Russian faction in a single, bloody night. Hamber stood at the head of the table, his gray-streaked hair neat, his sharp, tailored suit immaculate. He exuded an unshakable authority that demanded total silence. Beside him stood Shrund, watchful and steady. "We built our empires on power and respect," Hamber's voice echoed across the room, low, smooth, and carrying a terrifying weight. "But some of you forgot the foundation. You let ambition blind you, turning children into targets and families into collateral." He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward as his commanding gaze locked onto every boss present. "Starting tonight, the rules change. Underworld disputes stay between the men who choose this life. If anyone in this city touches a family member, uses a child as leverage, or targets a home, I will personally burn their entire organization to the ground. That is the new code." Nods of silent, trembling agreement rippled through the room. No one dared to challenge a man who had brought down an entire conspiracy and faced the ghosts of his past to save his blood. Hours later, the sun began to rise over the estate grounds, casting a warm golden light across the courtyard. Hamber walked alongside Michell, the morning breeze cool against their faces. Michelle's handsome features were quiet and reflective, carrying the heavy weight of the lessons he had learned through blood and fire. "You were never meant for the dark, son," Hamber said softly, placing a firm, loving hand on Michelle's shoulder. "I built this empire so you wouldn't have to carry its scars. Finish your education. Live a clean life, free from these shadows." Michell looked at his father, nodding with genuine gratitude as he stepped toward a bright, legitimate future, finally safe under his father's protective legacy. Please, like and subscribe.